My cousin falsely accused me of physical coercion. 10 years later, my family finally reached out to me. I grew up in what was probably the most ordinary family. My parents worked a lot, but always found time to care for me and my 3 older sisters. We weren't especially close as a family, but we didn't have any major problems either. The same could be said about our extended relatives. They lived a few hours away from us. We'd see each other during summer vacations or Christmas and always got along well. However, as we grew older, we naturally began to drift apart as everyone developed their own lives. I'm 31 now. When I was 22 and in university, my mom called me. That call turned my life upside down. I remember not answering at first because I was hanging out with friends, but she immediately called a second time. In our family, there was an unspoken rule. If someone calls twice, it's important. I thought someone might have died. So, when she called again, I apologized to my friends and picked up. On the other end of the line, there was chaos. It sounded like people arguing. When my mom realized I had answered, she went into another room and closed the door. I asked what was going on and heard my mom crying. I don't remember that conversation clearly, but she asked if I wanted to confess anything regarding X. X is my cousin on my mom's side, 7 years younger than me. She was 15 at the time. I hadn't seen X in years. I simply said no and asked what this was about. My mom started crying even harder and began accusing me of allegedly behaving inappropriately toward X in the past. She said that X had told everything to my sister, who then told my mom and my aunt. X claimed that when she was 9 and I was 16, I walked into a room where she was playing, and something happened, something she described as unacceptable. My mom demanded an explanation, but I was in shock. It seemed so implausible that I thought it must be a horrible joke. The last thing I remember was saying it wasn't true and that X must be mistaken. But my mom kept going, saying that X had given a detailed description of where and how it all supposedly happened. She kept asking, "Did you do it? Did you do it?" And every time I answered, "No." It ended with my mom putting the call on speaker. She and my dad said they didn't want to speak to me anymore and that I should never contact them again. 2 of my sisters later messaged me saying they were disappointed in me and then blocked my number. After the call, I went into the shower and stood under the water for a long time, trying to process my emotions. To this day, I don't know why I did that. When I calmed down, I started calling and messaging everyone, even X. No one answered. Those who hadn't already blocked my number quickly did so. The only response I got was a message from my dad asking me not to contact him anymore and saying they needed time to heal. That was 9 years ago, and I haven't spoken to anyone in my family since. To say that it broke me would be an understatement. For weeks, I walked around in a daze and barely ate. This all happened shortly before my thesis defense, and I was already at my limit. Thankfully, my co-author noticed something was wrong and stepped in to help, taking on most of the exam load. Thanks to him, I only had to answer the easiest questions. Otherwise, I would have failed for sure. Unsurprisingly, no one from my family showed up for my graduation. Then began the darkest period of my life. For the first year, I lived in constant fear that the police would knock on my door and arrest me for the accusations my family had made. I couldn't find a job, lived off my savings, and drank heavily. I became increasingly bitter and aggressive. The only reason I didn't hurt anyone was because there was simply no one around. One time, my neighbor called the police when I smashed a glass, but I managed to convince them I had just dropped it. Since there was no one else in the apartment, they left. Instead of sleeping, I spent nights planning ways I could hurt X and get away with it. I even thought about how I could do what she accused me of, but on a much larger scale. I know how disgusting that sounds, and I'm not proud of those thoughts. A year later, I landed my first real job in my field, and that's when things started to improve. I threw myself entirely into work because it was the only thing that gave me a sense of normalcy. It was something to focus on, something to keep my mind off everything else. The recovery was slow, but I started drinking less and smiling more often. I lived modestly but earned good money. So I began treating myself on my birthdays, buying things like a VR headset, a motorcycle, Lego sets, and so on. Last year, I finally bought a small house and moved out of my crappy apartment. I had always dreamed of having my own garage and a garden to take care of. That gave me a new sense of purpose, and my life is now somewhat in order. But the problems are still there. I've been on antidepressants for several years now. While they help, they don't make me happy. They just take away the dark thoughts and replace them with emptiness. My faith in people has almost completely eroded. I tried dating, but in all these years, I've only gone on 2 dates with different women.
It's incredibly hard to talk to someone like a normal person when it comes to connecting with others. What am I supposed to say to a potential partner if she asks about my family? Oh, they accused me of a horrible crime and we don't talk anymore, but I didn't do it. I swear.
The people I work with are mostly guys, so the only woman I truly talk to is my therapist, and I really like her. A few days ago, I received a message from my mom. It felt unreal, and at first I was too scared to open it. I just stared at the notification for hours before I finally worked up the courage. Yesterday, a second message arrived. In short, the gist was, "Hi. It's been so long since we talked. We miss you and want to know how you're doing." She wrote a long message about my sisters and how my nieces and nephews have grown. I didn't even know I had become an uncle. At the end, she wrote, "Know that we love you and always will. Love, Mom and Dad." The second message read, "Hi. We understand that you probably don't want to talk to us after everything that happened, but please hear us out. Last month, during a family gathering, the topic of you came up again. During the conversation, X started downplaying what supposedly happened to her. It got so awkward that she finally admitted that nothing ever happened and that maybe she dreamed it. We were all in shock. When we last spoke to you, we thought we were doing the right thing by protecting X and trying to do what we thought was best. We now realize that doesn't excuse how we treated you. What X did was wrong, and we're all angry with her. We've called everyone who knew about it and told them the truth. We all want to talk to you, and your sisters want you to meet them and their families. Please let us know if you can find it in your heart to forgive us. Love, Mom and Dad." Here's where I'm at now. I haven't replied, but they probably know I've read their messages. Honestly, I'm furious. I don't want to forgive them, and I can't guarantee I won't lose it if I'm in the same room with them right now. Part of me wants to call my family and unload all my anger, make them feel guilty for everything I went through until they're at rock bottom. Then I dedicate my life to making my cousin's life as unbearable as possible. Another part of me wants to just ignore them and keep living my somewhat normal life with my motorcycle and garden as my only companions. I don't have any friends, and the only people I talk to are my co-workers, but we're not particularly close. I called my therapist's clinic, but they said she's on vacation and won't be available for a few more weeks. I don't want to talk to anyone else but her. That leaves you, strangers on the internet. Please, tell me what to do. Should I ignore them and keep living as I am, or should I respond? And if I respond, what should I even say? I'm almost certain that meeting them in person anytime soon would be a bad idea. I'm not sure if my life would get better if I tried to rebuild those old connections. As embarrassing as it is to admit, I've dreamed of the day they'd apologize, imagining them falling to their knees and kissing my feet. A text apology feels ridiculously weak compared to what they did.
So before we move on to the update, let's take a moment to answer the author's questions in the comments. Should they respond to their parents? And if so, what exactly should they say?
Update. It's been about 3 months and a lot has happened, both good and bad. First off, X is still acting like a total piece of work. About a week after my family sent me those messages, she reached out with a long text of apologies. When I got it, I couldn't believe my eyes. She claimed to have mental health issues and said she'd been struggling with them for a long time, almost excusing why she did this to me. She wrote that she needs help and that her parents are helping her get it. It all felt like utter nonsense because I've known X my whole life. Before that horrible day, she was this bright and radiant person. The entire message felt like a string of excuses wrapped up with a brief apology. My original plan was to keep moving forward and slowly improve my life, but that message pushed me over the edge. I felt like I had to respond, unleashing the most vile words I could think of. In the end, the text I sent read, "You think you have serious mental health issues? Try being ripped away from your family and exiled for 10 years right as you're starting your adult life, and see how awful mental health problems can really get. I'm still trying to deal with all of this, and the last thing I need is the person responsible for my suffering feeding me excuses. Other relatives might have been in the dark all this time, but you knew the truth from the very beginning, and it never even crossed your mind to come clean earlier. Consider yourself lucky I didn't end things permanently during those dark times. My parents and sisters are one thing, but I will never forgive you for the irreparable damage you've done to me. Burn in hell and never contact me again." She didn't reply, but I can see that she read the message. Maybe she got the hint and decided not to respond. The good news is that I also replied to my parents. My messages weren't harsh because we ended up discussing everything over the phone. Hearing their voices again was strange. I used to associate those voices with the safety of home, but after everything that happened, it felt completely different. At first, I felt awful. All the bitter memories of our last conversation came flooding back. Those same voices yelling at me for something I didn't even do. The conversation lasted about 3 to 4 hours, and although it was hard for me, and probably for them too, it was the most productive conversation I've ever had with them. I expected a lot of excuses, like exes, but to my surprise, they didn't just apologize 1,000 times. They also fully admitted their mistakes. They said they had felt terrible all these years, and now that the truth had come out, they didn't know how to live with it. The hardest part was when I asked why they hadn't listened to me and believed their own son instead of the delusions of a niece. They said it had been incredibly difficult for them, but X had made her story so convincing that they felt like they had no choice. I told them that instead of cutting me off entirely, they could have at least tried to help me, but they didn't even give me a chance. They replied that they understood that, and that it was the hardest part for them. A year or two after the fallout, they wanted to reach out and try to figure things out, but they decided that knowing me, I wouldn't have talked to them, and it would have only made things worse. That part made me a bit angry because honestly, what difference does it make what kind of person I am? First and foremost, I'm their son, and that should have mattered the most. In the end, we came to the conclusion that we would maintain contact. I'm not planning to visit them for now, but at least it's a start. Despite the fact that there's still a lot of hatred in my heart toward them, I feel like things might get better, and that gives me a small sense of relief. Since that call, we've been talking regularly, and our conversations are slowly starting to resemble the ones we used to have. Maybe someday I'll visit them, but I don't know when that will happen or how it will go. How can I embrace those who so easily threw me out of their lives? Final update. 5 months have passed, and I finally have more good news than bad to share. First, many of you suggested I sue X or hold her accountable for what she did. While I agree that her actions were unforgivable and awful, I don't think pursuing legal action would achieve anything meaningful. This situation has dragged on for 10 years, and I just want to put it behind me. Taking her to court would cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, money I simply don't have. Plus, I can't help but think about the fact that X herself never escalated things to a legal battle. I know it's not the strongest reasoning, but it's a thought that lingers. I'm still in contact with my parents, and believe it or not, I actually visited them about a week ago. They've also cut ties with X, and it feels like she's now going through a version of what I experienced, a punishment that mirrors a legal trial in its own way. Trust me, I know what that's like. The visit with my parents went well. I haven't reconnected with the rest of the family yet because I want to take things slowly, but I did meet my parents for dinner. In my previous update, I wrote about not knowing how I'd handle seeing them. How do you greet people who so thoroughly shattered your life? But the meeting turned out better than I expected. I thought I'd be consumed by hatred, but instead, I felt a strange sense of relief when I saw them. It's odd. Maybe seeing them brought back some sense of normalcy. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't hug them until after we had a long and difficult conversation. I didn't want to hurt them, but I needed them to fully understand the extent of the pain they caused me. At one point, my mom broke down crying when I started sharing the darkest moments of my life during those years. They admitted that they know they can't undo the past, but said they want to build a more optimistic future. They even invited me to come home for Christmas and reconnect with the extended family. I told them about my plan to take things slow and said I'd consider it. For now, I feel cautiously hopeful. It's not easy, and I know healing will take time, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving towards something better. Although I'm still feeling conflicted, the hatred is slowly fading, and overall, I feel much better. I think the weight of this situation had been dragging me down for the past 10 years. Now that I'm free from judgment, it feels like an enormous relief. I've also started dating a wonderful woman, and our relationship is gradually becoming more serious. Life is finally getting better. Who knows what the next 10 years will bring, but for the first time in a long while, I feel like things are looking up. To everyone who read my story, I hope it serves as an example for you. No matter how heavy the problems or how deep the conflicts, resolution is possible, even if it takes 10 years to get there.
Thank you for following my journey to the end. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe you've experienced something similar, or perhaps it happened to someone you know. And don't forget to check out our previous video. Best of luck to all of you.